Right, we've just dragged Darren out from the conference where he ought to be speaking, or at least listening to somebody else speak, and got him into a field, which is the best place for him, I think. Darren, and for the ignorant, including myself, who are you and what do you do?
My name's Darren Doherty. I'm from Bendigo in central Victoria, Australia. I'm a regenerative agricultural consultant and educator. I do that all over the world. I design properties and then help farmers develop them.
What is permaculture?
Permaculture is a goal, as is regenerative agriculture. It's a design science which is fundamentally based around a range of design principles that we use for a particular set of scenarios, whether it's a business or whether it's a landscape or a society. What is Keyline then? Well, Keyline is a precursor to permaculture. It's been regarded as the world's first functional broad-scale landscape design system. The primary function of Keyline or primary outcome of Keyline is to try and bring water under control. And that doesn't matter whether it's a wet climate like we have here in the UK or a dry climate like we have in Australia. It focuses on building soil. Its methods were enabled us to overcome the myth that it took 1,000 or 10,000 years to build an inch of topsoil. You can build inches of soil in a year using its methods. So that's the foundation of it. But it's also a whole farm planning framework where we decide where we put roads, where we put ponds, where we put buildings, farm buildings, fences, and how we develop the soil, and where you put tree systems as well. Okay, just sticking with Keyline for a moment, Darren. What would you actually see on the ground if it were being implemented? What sort of examples can you give? Oh, there's so many. What we see a lot of, and what we're encouraging people to do a lot of, is try not to spend money. Try to identify from the outset where your bleeds are. So we spend a fair bit of time at the outset identifying that sort of brief of what they want to achieve in their goals in life, around their quality of life, forms of production and future resource base. We'll then sort of come in and say, all right, well, where are all of your financial bleeds? Where can we actually stop the hemorrhaging? Because often it's the inputs and the input profile that's really making these production systems inefficient and not profitable. So we'll work with fertility management regimes, etc. When we're looking with grazing systems, we'll just say, all right, well, the cheapest way to build up your production is to use wire and water. So change the way that you use some of these fantastic new fencing technologies that we have. Some people say the electric fence and the toothbrush were the greatest inventions of the 20th century, and I'd tend to agree that we're able to bring animals under control like we never have before. But let's water them well as well, because quality water means quality livestock, less parasites, etc. So we try and just work on the fundamentals to start with, as opposed to coming in and having creating some dreamscape of possibilities. Let's just work with the fundamentals and just work along from there. Try and be, as we say, try and be strategic, try to be pragmatic, and try and be incremental. So if you were looking at a landscape where Keyline's being practiced, what would you see? Well, you'd see the soil covered for a start, both in a cropping system and in a pastoral system. If I look at a soil like we've got here, which has probably been recently cropped, what I see mostly is bare soil. In a Keyline system where we're also using methods such as holistic management grazing, which are such a great team, well then the soil surface management is the focus. And if we ever dug the soil, we'd see that the root systems are a lot deeper than what they were before, and we'd see the paddocks hanging on for a lot longer, even if we get prolonged droughts. Which here in the UK I believe you're getting, although they're certainly not as long as ours. It's all relative. So what do you actually have to do to implement Keyline? Well, again, I'd have to say that it's really the focus on Keyline is probably not my complete focus, because I try and work with a range of methodologies, and holistic management is one that I work with a lot. So I try and get a marriage of whatever methodologies there are. But if I was trying to come into a property like this one here, my first focus would be to manage the way livestock moves through here, but also let's look at the soil compaction and see if we can accelerate the release of soil compaction by using some sort of subsoil plough. There's many of them that exist here, and they break that compaction. But the other thing is I would actually do it in a pattern across the landscape. So instead of just running up and down, in line with the tree lines, I'd actually design it so I passed through the landscape and had a slight fall from the valley towards the ridge. And so instead of all the water just naturally flowing towards the valley, it would actually start to naturally have a gradient towards the ridge. Ridges are the largest landform in a foothills landscape, so it's quite unfair in a way that all the water just goes to a valley and the ridges are left dry. I would do that as well to try and deepen the soil depth, and therefore deepen the root structure, and then therefore grow more biomass above the ground, which gives you more production and gives you increased amount of evapotranspiration, which therefore, you start to use plants as the non-mechanical pumps that they are, and do that and run it with livestock, so you can get an increased amount of production. So I'll be doing all of those things. I'd also be looking at, from a keyline perspective, maybe putting some water storages up high so that I can, instead of pumping water from underground, actually have it so that we can run a reticulated system through this other great invention, the plastic pipe, and portable water trough systems and all of that sort of thing, and so that I can move from a system that is dependent on energy to one that I can just turn a tap and just use gravity, because gravity's free. So there's some of the systems that I would do. Maybe install tree lines on a more vacant field, which follow some of those cultivation lines that I'm going to create, so that I have a very permanent landscape that will be there for hundreds of years, and people will have to follow these patterns that hydrate a landscape, not dehydrate it.
So keyline is part of the story.
Yep. Yeah.
What's the wider context
of regenerative agriculture? Regen Ag, well, look, our focus is to regenerate the soils, communities and farms of this planet, and we'll keep going until that occurs, because we have to. Regenerative agriculture is really a set of methodologies that any enterprise is going to select on the basis of need. It may be its holistic management grazing practices. It may be that it's keyline in terms of the overall way that the property is laid out. It may be that we use some of the biofertiliser systems that we've gleaned from Latin America, which enable farmers to get off the drip of NPK artificial fertilisers. It may be the marketing strategies that we're trying to work with. We're trying to get people in agriculture to be in control of not just the production of food, but also and fibre, but also the distribution, the processing, and the marketing of those stuffs, so that they can take a bigger lion's share of the love of money that's otherwise evacuating, just as their children are, from their farms. We're trying to make an agriculture that's exciting, that's invigorating, and profitable, so that we can get so we don't have this brain drain, this bleed of humans out of the agricultural landscape. That to us is as big a problem as soil erosion. We want to talk about succession, in the way that one farm is passed on to another. So there's a whole lot of stuff that really is that we're talking about to make this whole project of agriculture more regenerative and have a future.
What is the history of all this? I mean, keyline certainly has a history, doesn't it?
Yeah, keyline's been around since the late 40s. It was developed by P.A. Yeomans, who was a mining engineer in Australia. Holistic management was developed in the 1970s by Alan Savory, who was a Zimbabwean ecologist, politician, and rancher. Permaculture was developed in Australia by David Holmgren and Bill Mollison in the 70s. The biofertiliser stuff came out of Bayer Crop Science. I mean, Joel Salatin's Polyface farm has been going now, just had its 50th anniversary. I was just there. It's a brilliant undertaking, 5,000 customers, and Yeah, it's brilliant. 30 people working full time. It's an amazing property, all the family. So, you know, there's people who've been doing this stuff for a long time. You go back to the Rodale people who, you know, started off organic agriculture as a term in the 1940s. So there's been a lot of people who've been cracking on with this. The sort of post-war green revolution style agriculture had its sort of day in the sun while energy was cheap and while we had bountiful phosphorus reserves and all the rest of it. But, you know, its days are coming to a very fast close. So we're trying to work with all of these very sound regenerative methodologies to get them onto the tables and minds of people. Yeah.
Where, if at all, does carbon sequestration come into this?
Well, there's no better. I'm such a fan of grasses. As you can probably see from my reaction to that question, grasses are just the most amazing thing at sequestering carbon, because I describe them as if I can pick a leaf up. If I look at that leaf, I look at the pattern of that leaf as opposed to the pattern of a tree. A tree has a dendritic profile in the way it moves fluids, which is pretty, let's say, old world. And here we have this amazing thing called a grass, which is going to make a noise. And it's got the equivalent of a fluid transfer of a 20-lane freeway. So it just, you know, when it makes sugar, and other elements, it just compounds, it just moves them down to the root system. It has this amazing fibrous root system, great relationships with all of these soil microorganisms, and it's just a great way of taking the sun's energy and the energy of the air and water and putting it into the soil in the form of sugar, and then that becomes long chain carbohydrate, or long chain carbon becomes humus incredibly quickly, as opposed to the other stuff people carry on about with you know, using compost and green manures and all of this short chain carbons. It's nowhere near as stable as the humus that's created from the liquid chain of glucose transfer into the soil at a grass. There's no better thing. So grass and global warming, I mean, what a combination. Yeah, we've got to do that. We just see over and over grassland producers who, when they test their soil carbon levels over time, there's just, I don't know why everyone isn't doing it. It shouldn't be just policy. We've got a farmer, Colin Seiss, who developed one of the most amazing, with a colleague, Daryl Clough, they developed the most amazing system called pasture cropping, which is really, for the first time in the history of agriculture in 10,000 years, has enabled us to grow annual cereals into pasture without cultivation. Right, it's a truly symbiotic system. Now, they've done a 10-year longitudinal study on the amount of carbon sequestration in their paddocks. It's 30.6 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent per hectare per year. I mean, that's a mind-boggling amount of carbon that's being sequestered. I mean, if everyone did that, global warming would be over quickly. It'd be great, and we'd have the best nutrient-dense food imaginable. Our creeks would be flowing, and yeah, it would be just amazing. I'm pretty excited about it. And that's happening in really hard landscapes, you know, not like here. I mean, gee, you look at this country and it's not too bad, is it? What's going on?
How well do the techniques you're talking about actually apply in a country like this, as opposed to a very different land in Australia?
Well, it's all about picking and choosing your fights and picking and choosing your methods. You know, agriculture is agriculture, and you know, it's a system you're trying to take a piece of land and you're trying to make money out of it. So I don't see it as being much different. We just choose the methodology that's most appropriate. And for here, we've got water problems. We still have to bring water under control. There's dry landscapes, there's wet landscapes, so let's deal with them. The soil issues are more or less the same. The fact that you've got a more humid climate certainly lets you get away with things that you wouldn't be able to get away with in other more seasonal climate regimes. But I don't see any difference. And you know, some of the people that have come along to the course are already doing some of this stuff, and they're just loudly endorsing the fact that there are many of the methodologies that we're talking about are already working here in Britain. So yeah, so I don't see any different. Really, it's just a matter of just picking matching the methodology to the situation.
So how can farmers in this country get their heads around all of this and understand it?
Well, I often say, well, in keyline we have a scale of permanence, and the most difficult thing to change in the keyline scale of permanence is the climate. And I would have to say, I always talk about climate not just in terms of the biospheric climate, but also in the climate of the mind. And I would have to say that the most difficult thing to change on the planet is actually the farmer's mind. But look, you know, the motivations for people are very different, and so we need to sort of be quite broad with that. There's got to be a willingness to maybe try some new things and have a bit of a look outside of the box that sort of brought you to this point, and sort of say, well, why is it that my children aren't wanting to farm? I mean, what is it? Is it just because I'm a price receiver? Is it because I'm going to blame the supermarkets? Or am I actually going to say, well, maybe I had a part in this. Maybe there's some things I could have done differently. Maybe there's still things I can do in order to change the circumstances that I have. Part of that will be education. I think the government's got a role to play in terms of subsidising education around this. We've had a great scheme in Australia called Farm Ready, which is where the federal government gave $1,500 of subsidy to each farmer in Australia to do climate change related, training that enabled farmers to be ready for climate change. And I thought that was profound, and as a result we got 2,000 plus farmers to workshops last year in Australia. Yeah, so, and most of those people, we'd have to say, are off doing something now that's different to what they did before. So education has a lot to do with it. It's got to be very targeted. It's got to be very specific, at the same time as giving them some sort of hope. But I think engaging with young people is a really important thing. If you're not a natural marketer, well then find someone who is. If it's too difficult for you to manage your landscape more actively, well then maybe work in a complementary relationship with somebody else who can. There's lots of new ways that we're sort of working with farmers to have them become more regenerative, or at least start to move on that pathway as opposed to the other.
So what is this course that you're running today?
Well, it's discussing all of the things I've just been rambling about, and a lot more, I suppose. We're going through each of the keyline scales of permanence, which is where we talk about the climate as related to, what do you do with the climate you have, but then also how do you deal with the climate that you have internally. Then we look at the landform, how do we actually look at trying to gain the most out of our landforms, our geography. Then how do we control water, which is the third element, and bring water under control, and reticulate it in different ways, etc. Store it in different ways and get more water recharge. We also look at where you place roads and access, both in existing systems and in new systems. Where we place trees, how they fit into it in hedgerows, in forest, various forestry layouts, from block plantings to alley plantings to hedgerows, etc. We're then looking at buildings and where we place buildings in all of this, both working with existing building placement and new building placement. And we look at fencing systems, looking at the new ways that we can fence, working within the existing framework, and how do we use some of the new electric fencing systems, etc., which are highly mobile, highly portable. And then we look at the soil, what are the parameters by which we can work with this most impermanent of items, either, something that we can regenerate incredibly quickly and we can lose very quickly. And then I've added a couple of other items to the keyline scale of permanence in poly-marketing, which is a discussion around succession, but also the various marketing systems, how, like I said, so we can take control of processing, distribution and marketing. And then we deal with energy. So the energy discussion is not around metaphysics, it's around, what are the opportunities now that we're entering an era of declining oil resources, how can we actually use some of this biomass? And this is where Britain has a very good opportunity, because it's such a biomass rich environment. how can we use some of these raw resources? How in dairies or intensive operations can we make better use of the effluents and all of these sorts of things to keep our agricultural systems running? Yeah, so that's really the snapshot of what we're going through in the 3 days.
Just a couple more things. What's your own background? How did you get into all this?
Well, I grew up on a family farm just outside of Bendigo, and it had been in our family since 1853. And my Irish and German stock before that were both from farms in Schleswig-Holstein and Donegal. But they escaped the feudal tyranny of Europe to come out to the wonderful country of Australia, and probably got a shock with the weather. My father was killed in the Vietnam conflict when I was 4 months old, so my maternal grandfather effectively became my grandfather, and he was, as we were discussing earlier, a font of all kinds of veranda wisdom. And he made it very clear to me that he could see in his lifetime, as a person who grew up in the Depression, that those times would come again, and said, more or less, that the skills that I give you, the rural skills that I give you, will enable you to survive, just as they enabled him to survive that horrible time of the Depression. And so that and I left the farm when I was about 18 and went and became a chef. And I worked across Australia doing that until I was about 21, and then started working in in the organic industry as a grocer, and met a huge number of organic producers back then in what was sort of pioneering days of the organic industry in Australia. And that really stimulated because I became a foodie. I came from a great farm, became a foodie, and then got back into agriculture through the sort of back door, through the retail route. And that just enlivened the whole thing up again. And then I just started dispensing advice over the counter, and after I just accumulate all of this knowledge from all of these people that we're working with, and then ultimately became a designer and consultant and manager of farms. So I've got hundreds of farms that I work with across the world that occupy a lot of my email space and Skype space in having all these discussions about what we're going to do next and all of that. So that's where I keep saying yes, as they say. Yeah.
Why do you care?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. I care, I suppose the root of it was growing up and seeing, football teams folding and merging, and just seeing all my friends move into the city, and them sort of coming home and saying, I wish it could be different. I love it out here. Why are these circumstances the way they are, that I can't stay out on the farm and all that? And I know plenty. I go all over the world and people say the same things. And yeah, it's this loss of humans from the agricultural landscape. And I see kids who aren't in contact with the soil and animals. I mean, we've got a model farm here, so kids can just see where milk comes from or what a lamb looks like. And I mean, that's just tragic. And I just can't stand that. And I also care because I know how much, having created and seen so many fantastic agricultural landscapes, I just want everyone to have that. It's so I suppose a bit of egomania in there and thrown in, but I care about our planet, and I care about my children's future, and I care about the farmers. Farmers are the ones who, unbeknownst to most people, make this whole human journey possible, because without them there wouldn't be any food and fibre. It's just as simple as that. So yeah, that's what I care about. That's why I care.